are going to transition into our message. I'd like to read a passage of scripture for you. Now Herod was angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they came to him with one accord, and having persuaded Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they asked for peace, because their country depended on the king's country for food. On an appointed day, Herod put on his royal robes, took his seat upon the throne, and delivered an oration to them. And the people were shouting, "The voice of a God and not of a man." Immediately an angel of the Lord struck him down, because he did not give the glory, and he was eaten by worms and breathed his last.
Again, I don't know what you all want me to do with that, but I'll give it a go. Maybe you could be familiar with Michael Corleone from The Godfather. Any Godfather fans? Yes. Okay, so you know his demise. His life ends with his daughter being killed and him being isolated from everything that mattered to him and once protected through brutality and manipulation. Maybe you could think about Commodus from the movie Gladiator. Any Gladiator fans? Apparently Gladiator 2 is about to come out. Anybody? No? Okay. Blake told me that. It's going to be a special one. But maybe you could think about Commodus and his rise to power actually coming through the murder of his father and continuing to pursue his kingdom through political manipulation and complete brutality of other people. One I think you'd all be familiar with is Scar. Betrayal of his brother, bringing evil into the kingdom and unwillingness to change, and ends up being turned on by those that he once led and were closest to him. The death we just read about that ended in worms eating his body was that of King Herod, who we see in the New Testament. We actually see a few different Herods. But this would be King Herod, who, through his own life, gained power and kept power through political manipulation and brutality that would go so far beyond our wildest imagination. And what we can do is look at each of these characters and think that they are so far off. That they're so far away from who you and I are that we can't even imagine the step between who we are right now and what it takes to become people like that. And there's also something that we celebrate as we think about each of their demise, as we see the hyenas turn on Scar, as we see the ending of Commodus's life through the gladiator games. As we see these things, we can even celebrate them to say they got exactly what they had coming for them, that they've gotten what they deserve. There's been a sense of justice that has happened. But I don't know about you, there can also be a little moment of compassion where we can actually look at their life and we can think, man, if they would have just turned in that moment, if they would have just changed, if they would have just listened, if they had so many chances, but it seems like they kept going further and further and further. And they make the statement true, the famous quote that says, "All evil runs through the heart of every man and woman." And so what we want to do, which I'm so excited this is over because I'm done being beat up for 3 weeks, is we want to look at our series of Cautionary Tales, where we're actually looking at these bad guys and wondering what good lessons can be taken away. And at this point, I look forward to some reprieve going into Summer Fun Sunday, which I don't think we'll be talking about bad guys that day. But I just want to remind us, as a statement of grace, a whole point of why we're doing this is to remember that, like, the most broken parts of our character don't have to define us, but they can actually refine us if we allow them to. That we can allow the things that are off inside of us, that aren't working well, that we don't like, that we don't know what to do with, that that we're just trying to always wrestle with or become familiar with in order to grow. I mean, all these different things that we might want to tuck away out of guilt or shame, if we actually open ourselves to maybe the dark crevices of our hearts, we have a chance at being refined. So may these last 2 Sundays and this Sunday be met with grace to say that this is one of the greatest invitations that Jesus offers. That you and I can change and grow, but it does not just come from being more of who we are. It actually asks us to give up who we are to become more like him. And it takes conversations, and it takes scriptures, and it takes the Spirit working in and through us to point the ways in which he's asking us to become more like him, to become more gracious and beautiful and kind, to become more loving and self-giving. So over and over and again, I want us to walk away with the reminder that the broken parts of our character don't have to define us, but if we allow them to, they can actually refine us. So you might be familiar with King Herod. Again, there's a couple different ones, but the one we're talking about is the one, there's a famous story about him that Matthew captures, one of the friends to Jesus, of when Jesus was actually born. Do we remember that story? It's probably one of the most common ones read around Christmas time. So we're like halfway there, I guess, through the year, which we'll read again. So it might feel weird hearing this story as we near maybe the back end of summer here. But Matthew captures it like this. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I may go to and worship." What led to this moment is that everyone was proclaiming, or some were proclaiming, that a king was born. And Herod, seeing himself as a king, he actually served under a king over a couple areas, but he very quickly was curious of how another king could be born in his area if he was the king. And so through this, he hears of these magi. We also hear of them as wise men, those who follow the stars to make sense of their life and take direction. And he brings them in and says, "Hey, follow your stars. Do the thing that you need to do. And then, man, whenever you get there, report back to me so I know who to go worship, this new king that I'm so excited about." And then when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi after they did not report back to him, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Can you imagine this? Could you imagine being a young parent of a 2-year-old, and out of nowhere, there is a decree that that child was going to be murdered for no other reason than someone felt threatened. For no other reason than someone was afraid that they were going to lose their kingship. For no other reason that someone had to continue to protect everything that had been built, everything that they had worked for, everything that they had sacrificed to this point. And all the babies under 2 were the ones that need to pay for it. How did Herod get to this point? How did Herod get to do something so shocking and repulsive and evil? You see, what's interesting, he was actually a great king, Herod the Great. We think about the buildings and the cities that he created. We can actually see a couple here on the screen. I think this first one is his city, the city which he named Caesarea as a way of honoring Caesar so that he could continue to work with the Romans. This is a city that was built from scratch in that time. There was actually no import or export. There was nothing for ships and everything to come in and to come out. There's an amphitheater here on the bottom corner for the Roman games. We see justice systems. We see a temple, which we'll look at the next picture. But this is an entire city at that time built from scratch. Another one he built was the actual Jerusalem temple. He built the temple that was once destroyed for the sake of the Jewish people, which he was not one of them, but he was their king. And he rebuilt the temple in its glory, larger than it ever was before. He goes on to build this, what we might think of now as we think about the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall. That is a piece of this that has now been destroyed a long time ago. But the Wailing Wall is the remains of this right here. And so he builds this for the Jewish people. He builds this for them, which he is not even one of them. He is a provider. He is an emperor. He's a conqueror. He is everything that you might want in a king. But Stephen Miller, an author of biblical characters, says this: many scholars say Herod's ambitious building program was all about himself, about wanting to rule a glorious kingdom. Even the temple, they suggest, was more practical than religious, a way to seduce the Jews. For compelling evidence that Herod's world revolved around himself, there's probably no better place to look than his family tree. Herod is accused of self-protection, of self-preservation through political manipulation and complete and utter brutality. We see in this next slide just a glimpse of his brutality. Mariam, his favorite wife, which was his second wife, he felt that she was undermining him, and so he had her executed. That was after having her 17-year-old brother drowned in a pool because he thought that he was also undermining him. Mariam's grandfather, John Hyrcanus II, who had been high priest and a member of the ruling Jewish family before Rome took over. Mariam's mother, Alexander, Mariam's brother, Aristobulus, his two sons by Mariam, Alexander and Astrobulus, and a third son, Antiphar, by his wife, Doris. He had 10 wives overall. He was known to go into the city dressed in commoner clothes to go and hear about what people thought about him, to learn, did they like him or not, to learn what they were saying, to actually get a sense of, was he appreciated or not. He wanted to be recognized. By the time we got to his death, he wanted to be recognized and celebrated so much that he actually imprisoned a large group of religious leaders, and that upon his death they would be released so that people would cheer. What a weird, sick, twisted, evil individual who grew an empire through brutality and political manipulation. There was no end or extent at which he wouldn't go. And while we want to look at him and say, I can't believe, and I could never become that, which I actually believe. I don't think anybody is going to go on and do the Herodian things. I truly do believe that about this room. Isn't there like just a little bit of Herod inside all of us, where we want to protect our little kingdoms? Whereas there's things that we own, there's things that we have, there's things that we've gained that we'll do things to protect them. And it might be justified. What's that show right now with Bryan Cranston? It's called The Judge. Has anyone seen the show The Judge? Okay, it's a good one. But you have a man who is a righteous judge. He is. He actually fights and speaks on behalf of the poor and the impoverished. And what ends up happening along the way is the thing he loves most gets into trouble. Your Honor, there we go. Thank you. I have no idea what The Judge is, but Your Honor. But the thing he loves most, the thing he has left, the thing he lives for, becomes threatened. And he turns over and he compromises his integrity, and he makes one decision after another decision. He lies and he covers that one. He keeps going and going and going. How very quickly once a righteous and honorable judge who did everything to uphold the law is now the one breaking it to protect his little kingdom. Now, I could argue that many might even do something similar for their child or for their family member or for their best friend. There's ways in which we could justify and make sense. So I wonder this morning if you would join me in thinking about your little kingdoms as I've had to do this week. And maybe one of the ways in which you could measure whether you have a little kingdom or not is there's two things. One, if you look at finally getting to that point, whatever that point is, or having that thing, that will bring you everything that you're looking for. That will bring you the peace that you desire. That'll bring you the satisfaction. That'll bring all of your hope to the forefront. Once you get there, so that could be a little kingdom, and or it's the thing that you might be most afraid of losing. The thing that if this is taken, the thing if this is in compromise, the thing that if this is gone, then the world would end. And you might be most apt to protect that, to preserve that, to protect yourself, to preserve yourself. So what might be, if we step away from the Herodian lifestyle of living in that century, which I'm so thankful we don't, if you can engage with me, what might be some kingdoms that you and I have today? You can go ahead and say them out loud in 1 to 3 words. Our house. Job, family. It's only 3. We can solve this. Come on. Position. Ministry. Skills. Image. What else? Title. Finances. Possessions. Health. What else? Career. Knowledge. Yeah. It's good, man. We all got kingdoms. It can come in many ways and forms, all shapes and sizes. Maybe 1 or 2 more. This isn't an exhaustive list. 1 or 2 more. Time. Safety. Yeah, we could keep going, can't we? And of course, all the things you named aren't in this room. Those are other people that have little kingdoms, right? But like every single day, there is something that we might be going after that we believe is the fullness of everything, and or there's something that we have to self-protect or self-preserve because we have little kingdoms. How does that start to work out? So now, if we think about Herod as political manipulation and complete, utter violence and brutality against other people, what's that look like for us? And don't admit to anything you don't want the whole room to hear. But what starts to happen? How do we start to behave? How do we start to act? Just a handful here. Become selfish. Defensive. Resentful. Maybe 2 more? Protective. Controlling. Paranoid. You know what's interesting? None of those show up in the ways that Jesus invites us to live, do they? So there's something off. There's a separation somewhere. There's a way in which my natural way of being, my desires, the things I want, seem to be a little bit, or if not a lot, misaligned with the life, the teaching, and the ways of Jesus. Because we have all those words, but then what he seems to talk about more is grace and freedom and love and unity and compassion. There's a saying a guy in Australia popularized that I've appreciated in these last handful of years, recognize that oftentimes in the Christian church, and if you're here and new to faith, new to Jesus, trying to figure things out, agree with probably many of the thoughts that you have about the church, because this is one of the ones that points to the separation between this life of Jesus and how oftentimes we live as Christians. And he said that what we want is the kingdom without the king. meaning that what we want is peace. What we want is love. What we want is unity. What we want is grace. What we want is mercy. We want everything that Jesus talks about, offers, and lives and offers us. We want all of it. But what we don't want to do is give up our little kingdoms. We say, oh yeah, no, I love Jesus, but I know we got to forgive that person, but I know I should be more free with this, but and every but statement is a protection of our little kingdom. Because Jesus has offered us a greater kingdom, one so far beyond our own. But we want to hold on to our so much, but we still want the things that he offers. But are we willing to offer our little kingdoms for the sake of his great kingdom? So what do we do? I don't know about you, but this is a daily and weekly wrestle and struggle. How do we not do this? I don't know if we'll ever not do it. Can I be honest? Like there's something inside of us that is continuing to be made into the image of God. Why else would we need God and his Spirit to work in and through us if we've already arrived? And so there's a reality that you and I will always have little kingdoms. The question becomes not, do we have little kingdoms or not? Are we willing to turn over our little kingdoms or not? Are we willing to recognize them, to come face to face with them, and to offer them so that we don't have to live to protect them? In this same story, we see the narrative of the Magi. And we know before this, Herod said, hey, go and come back to me and tell me where he is so that I can go and worship. We read here about the Magi. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We see in King Herod the news of this king, and he wants to self-protect and self-preserve. We see the Magi and the news of this king, they become overjoyed and they become self-giving. They offer everything that they have. They chase a star in the night over years to go and worship, to go and turn their little kingdom over, recognizing that there is a greater king who wants active rule and reign in their life, and that they can give up their own rule and reign. Because I don't know about you, when I try to rule and reign my life, it doesn't always go extremely well. When I'm self-protecting, it doesn't always go well. When I'm trying to preserve something, it doesn't always go well. We see a complete contrast as Matthew has grabbed Herod and said, here's a little bit of Herod in all of us, but here's the invitation to become more like the Magi. That we be people that when the news of a good, gracious, loving king who wants to actively rule in our life, that we follow, that we pursue, that we move towards, and when we arrive, we worship. Another word for worship, I know we think about music and singing and standing together oftentimes in the church, but really what we're talking about is consecration. Consecration to Jesus and his kingdom moves us from self-protection of our little kingdoms. Consecration meaning fully devoting ourselves to something, giving ourselves to something, offering ourselves to something. And oftentimes there's a moment of consecration. In the church, you might think about, hey, why don't we all close our eyes and bow our head and let's, say a prayer that we believe in the being in the sky. There's a moment in which we might make a decision to hand ourselves over to Jesus, but consecration is a continual act over and over and over again. Life with Jesus is not about being consecrated, it's about continuing to consecrate yourself. And in that, when we offer ourselves to Jesus over and over and over again, that starts to just move us away from our little kingdoms, slowly but surely. So let me ask you this. What are some ways in which we could consecrate ourselves? What does consecration look like? Again, in just a couple words. does this look like? What does it look like to offer yourself to the way of Jesus? Practicing Sabbath, stopping, rest, working, all work and delighting. Surrender. What's an act of surrender look like? Trusting. What's that look like? Thank you for indulging me. Letting go. Good. Okay. I hear repentance, or is it something else? Another one? Servanthood. Giving.
Saying yes when your first impulse might be a no.
Saying yes when your first impulse may be no.
Humbling oneself to coming before the Father and kneeling at His feet.
Yeah. Humbling. Yeah. Putting others first. Obedience. Maybe one or two more?
Giving all things to the Lord.
Giving all things to the Lord. One more.
His will be done.
His will be done. You see, each of these is an overarching theme that can be lived out in small and practical ways every single day. To humble ourselves can oftentimes be a prayer of examine. To say, God, I don't see everything. Can I sit with you for a few minutes and let you actually move in my heart? Let me just use a couple questions to help guide me there. Servanthood, to actually do something for other people, especially those who may not be like you and or you don't even like. Repentance, where there's a way of actually opening ourselves up to the harm in which we've caused, a separation in which we've caused, and to ask for forgiveness and to move forward. We could keep going down each of these, right? These are practices. Our mission here of practicing the way of Jesus really could be summed up as consecration. And that is a way in which we're saying that I want the kingdom and I also want the king. You ever notice anyone in your life that has helped you see something that you didn't see before? And they said, hey, what if you did this instead? Now, two ways. One, we could look at that as restrictive. We could think, oh man, they just want to tell me what to do with my life. And or we could look at that as freeing. Wow, that is so much better than the way I was going to go. And I offer to you that Jesus is that. He says, take on my yoke, which is easy and the burden is light. That this is actually a way that, yes, it's hard. Yes, there's still something saying, no, go this way, not that way. But it's the thing that actually leads to peace above and beyond your and I's understanding. When we don't know the next step and we can't see the future and we don't really know where to go from here, we can rest and be still because we can know that He is God, that He is before all things and that He holds all things together, that He is good and gracious and kind, that He is for you and I. Every single teaching of Jesus is to invite us further into His kingdom and to release our own little kingdoms. And it's a practice. It's the things that we do and the things that we take on. So today, this week, what little kingdom is coming up for you? And what's a practice to move away from it and to consecrate yourself to the Lord? To say, God, I want your kingdom. Here's mine. And I'm going to give this up by practicing this thing. I'm going to invite the worship team up. Just a couple more things, and then we're going to go into singing and communion, which communion would be a way of practicing consecration, to offer ourselves over and over again to the life, the ways, and the teachings of Jesus. Coming into this, I wanted to ask you questions because I wanted to get more answers around the practical ways in which we could consecrate ourselves. But ultimately, I think it does start here and here. There's something that we're from this place offering ourselves, and then it forms into practice. And there's been a prayer that has helped guide me the last 10 months or so through something called the Ignatian Exercises, and this was written by a gentleman by the name of St. Ignatius, whose his leg was taken off by a cannonball in war, like a typical Thursday, I guess. And he ended up on bed rest. And as you can imagine, hundreds of years ago, with modern medicine, without it, bed rest was a very long time, especially when you just lost a leg to a cannonball. And he's a self-proclaimed heathen. The life that he lived was very frivolous leading up to this moment. And he had one book from an ancient church father, and he had the Bible with him during his bed rest. And he went on a journey in that bed rest that brought him to be the St. Ignatius that we now know, who started what's called the Jesuit movement. And it would be a people who are contemplatives in action. It's a people who are trying to find God in all things, not a secular and sacred divide. And he writes a whole exercise, and for us to go through and go on this journey with him, to receive God's love, to come in tune with our own sin, to become a friend to Jesus as he walks towards a cross to be murdered, motivated by God's love for us. And then to imagine what a mission looks like of joining God's kingdom, his active rule and reign in our life. And he writes something called the Principles and Foundations, which is maybe the base of the work. And towards the end of the writing, he says this as a prayer. In everyday life, then, we must hold ourselves in balance before all created gifts, insofar as we have a choice and are not bound by some responsibility. We should not fix our desires on health or sickness, wealth or poverty, success or failure, a long life or a short one. For everything has the potential of calling forth in us a more loving response to our life forever with God. Our only desire and our one choice should be this: I want and I choose what better leads to God's deepening life in me. Why don't we stand together?